everyone. My name is Mary Mendenhall. I'm a professor at Teachers College, Columbia University here in New York. We want to maximize our time together. So we're going to jump right in and pass the baton to our case study presenter, Dr. Lizzie Adelman, who is currently a technical advisor for research and evaluation at FHI 360. So Lizzie, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to you, and then we'll come back for some discussion. And we also want all of you to engage with our call to action for the Teachers in Crisis Context Collaborative event series. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on the other side. So thank you, Lizzie, so much.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to share my screen. And just let me know if, let's see, if I go to the presentation mode. Let's see, hold on. But I'm at the end of my video. Sorry, guys. Let's see if I can start it in the,
no worries.
At the beginning. All right, but you can see it okay? And you can hear me okay? Is that good? Okay. Because I no longer can see.
Yeah, hold on one second. Like we could see, at least on my side, I could see it when you had it before you put it in presentation mode, and now it's kind of a white block. Or what do you see? My partner in crime.
It's the same here. That's what I see.
The white block.
Yeah.
Great, because I have a Mac and nobody likes Macs in this world. Okay, let me just see out of sheer curiosity if I can.
Lizzie, can I try on my side and see what happens? I've got it up and ready to roll.
Okay, sure.
I know you wanted the power, but
yeah, I know. It's a little bit. I did a couple of last minute changes, so that is fine. It'll be.
Can folks see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's do that, Lizzie, if it's okay with you. Just I'm
sure.
worried about time. I want to make sure we can chat.
Sure, that's fine. The last side's a little bit different, but that's all right. Okay, yeah, so I will just remember what I was going to say. So great, thank you for joining us, and I'm really pleased to be here having a chance to participate in such a meaningful event. As Mary introduced, my name is Lizzie Adelman, and my presentation focuses on the experience of Syrian refugee teachers in Lebanon as they manage the complexities of their professional roles as teachers and their personal realities as refugees. I think it ties in really well with the video that we watched, which was very much a very short encapsulation of the work that I'm going to present here, or a very good summary of some of my own findings. And while I started this research a few years ago, teacher well-being, and particularly the well-being of refugee teachers, was not really such a hot topic at the center of global conversations. And it's really been propelled forward thanks to a lot of the help of experts that are on this call itself. And so I hope today that we can just continue to add more depth to those conversations and think more holistically about what it means to support teachers working in some of the most difficult circumstances. So you can go to the next slide, Mary. So just to give you a heads up, I'm going to start with a brief framing of the context for this study. This has been, sorry guys, there's a little bit of edits that I've done to this, but and I'm going to present after that some narratives of 3 Syrian refugee teachers, Haroon, Sana, and Maher. And this research was conducted long before the pandemic began, but then I'll provide some further updates drawn on informal conversations with some of the connections I still have in Lebanon. And then we'll spend a moment emphasizing how this work ties to the call to action that brought us here today. So you can go to the next one. You're gonna hate me, Mary, so click. So today, according to UNHCR, there are around 850,000 Syrian refugees living in Lebanon, a country which is around, has around 5 million citizens. And these 2 countries share an extensive border, a language, a cultural heritage, but also a very contentious history. And so I could spend hours unpacking that very contentious political relationship, but I'm going to be very reductive in my presentation here and just point to a few very important events that help illuminate these tensions, as these geopolitical relationships are really important to the lives and experience of the Syrian refugees that are residing in Lebanon. So starting in 1975, This is the year which officially marks the start of Lebanon's own bitterly violent civil war, which was fueled by political and religious divisions and a jockeying for power. So Mary, if you can click. In 1976, Syrian troops entered Lebanon, a move which either fueled or dissipated tensions, depending on your perspectives. And then Mary, if you can click. Syrian troops were then finally forced out in 2005 after around 30 years of occupation and many years after the civil war had actually ended. So then, Mary, if you can click again, just 6 years after that, the Syrian refugee crisis began. It's the very close in time. My timeline isn't so great representatively, but that was a crisis that started by a violent uprising, right, in Syria. And a flow of that caused a flow of over 1 million refugees into Lebanon's border that only really added additional stress to a very strained relationship between these countries and citizens. This study, Mary, you can click, was conducted between 2015 and 2016. And at that time, Lebanon was host to the highest number of refugees per capita in the world, with 1 in 4 people being a refugee. Next slide, please, Mary. The study itself includes 4 non-formal schools where Syrian refugee teachers were teaching Syrian refugee students. The data included around 42 interviews with refugee teachers and 116 classroom observations. The majority of the teachers I interviewed had been teaching before they were displaced, and about 2/3 of them had been in Lebanon for 3 years or more at the time. Many of the teachers I spoke with then are still in Lebanon now and still teaching, which means that they've now dedicated around the last 7 or 8 years of their formal professional careers to a system that, in the very way we choose to categorize it, that is non-formal, somehow subtly suggests that their role as teacher is makeshift, temporary, or non-official, although of course they are very much officially educating students to move forward in their lives in their own education. Okay, so that being said, Mary, if you can click to the next slide and click again. This is where you're really gonna not like me, Mary. So I want to tell you about Haroon. Haroon arrived in Lebanon after fleeing continued violence in his hometown in Syria, as well as impending forced conscription into the Syrian army. When I met Haroon, he was completing his first year as an English teacher in Lebanon. And Haroon describes the happy, animated personality he presented to his students, if you could click, Mary, as a performance, a role that he steps into each time he enters into the classroom. For Haroon, shifting into the identity of teacher allows him to, please click again, Mary, mentally disconnect from the extreme challenges he faces in his life as a refugee. And in his classroom, Haroon considers his role to be multi-layered, explaining that teaching English is not really the purpose all the time, as he's an English teacher. Instead, he often focuses on other lessons, such as how to build student self-esteem and sense of empowerment. Haroon wants his students to understand that despite their challenging circumstances, they have the ability to determine their own future, pointing to the important role of education, as Haroon explains. Can you click one more time, Mary? As pointing to the important role of education. So he says there's always going to be challenges that can be overcome because we can still smile, we can still be here to learn. So next I'd like to present Maher. Could you click, Mary? The day I first met Maher, he was meticulously dressed in a gray suit and shining black shoes. He's soft-spoken, yet determined and unwavering in his mission as an educator. He was forced to flee Syria in less than 24 hours, moving from a comfortable situation, financial situation, to a life as a refugee. In his words, he explains, "I did not take anything with me from Syria. I left the country in a rush. I left the classroom in Syria and came directly to teach in Lebanon." In his classroom, Maher wants his students to feel united in their shared difficulties, wrapping himself up into those experiences himself. Could you click, Mary? I try to make my students feel that we are one family, that we suffer the same thing, and we should try to help each other. In Syria, Maher taught at a selective high school, while in Lebanon, he teaches first and second graders, many of whom still don't know how to read or write. It's been an immense struggle, but is Maher very proud of his professional growth? Could you click, Mary? Great. He says, this is a new experience for me. Even though it's a challenging experience, I'm benefiting from it. Finally, I would like to bring in the voice of Sana, who, thank you, was an art teacher in Syria for 6 years before fleeing to Lebanon. In Syria, Sana's husband was the one with the dependable salary, but here in Lebanon, the family's counting on her for the majority of its financial support. And Sana feels extremely lucky to have found a teaching job in Lebanon, as being an educator is a core element of her identity. Could you have a clip for me, Mary? I have loved teaching ever since I was a child. I used to dream of becoming a teacher like my mother. For her, returning to teaching was, click again, please, a life-changing moment, an opportunity that has been vital in her ability to manage the challenging and overwhelming situation of being a refugee. And she feels an extreme sense of purpose in the work itself, as it keeps her motivated despite how exhausting and demanding her role can be. She also points to the way in which her teaching skills have expanded as a result of the professional development she has received in Lebanon from her school and other organizations. She said that she's changed her approach to teaching, integrating more hands-on and student-centered activities. Sana dreams about the day she can return to Syria. Can you click for me, Mary? That's it, Mary? So I can apply the teaching methodology I've learned in Lebanon to teaching in Syria. She hopes for new opportunities in Lebanon also to continue to her professional development. Can you go to the next slide, Mary? Thanks. So in the words of these teachers, we hear a deep professional identity and dedication to professional work. They speak of a sense of dignity, pride, and purpose, and identify goals and aspirations as professionals. They see their role as one of building community and connections and reconstructing the future for their students, but also very importantly for themselves. And while being a teacher is a foundational experience for Harun, Sana, and Maher, their professional aspirations often collide with their personal circumstances. Could you go to the next slide, please, Mary? So the positive forward-looking perspective that Harun presents in class is often tested by the personal challenges and circumstances that are quite difficult that he faces as a refugee. So Harun describes his life in Lebanon, could you make one click for Mary, as a disappointment, as one disappointment after another. Like so many refugees, he suffered from poverty and psychological stress. He's seen his attempts at employment, education, and migration all blocked or derailed due to his refugee status. His experiences impact the perspective he brings into the classroom. While he tries to envision a bright future for his students and by extension himself, there are days when he simply cannot shake the feeling that his efforts are futile. Click, please. It's just insane. What I'm doing is just insane. It's going nowhere. It's spinning wheels, he explains. He simply cannot see how the education he's providing will help chart a positive path forward. In addition, Harun finds managing his own challenges plus trying to support students through their experiences as extremely overwhelming. And at times he feels like he's ready to leave teaching, explaining, if you can click, Mary. I cannot give anymore. I just feel completely drained. Click again, please, Mary. During our conversation, Maher's concerns often center on his worry that he does not have the skills or the outside support to best serve his students. He remembers in the early days of teaching feeling, please click, scared about the health problems. I did not know how to approach students because I know that each one has a psychological problem. Maher also struggles about how to help his students navigate relationships with their Lebanese hosts, as he feels the rejection of the Lebanese quite keenly. You can, one more click, Mary. The Lebanese people rejected the Syrians, so this makes it difficult for me to tell the student that he should fuse or adapt in Lebanese society. I cannot teach a student how to adapt in a society that's rejecting him. And then a click, Mary. Despite her dreams of return, Sana admits that the future feels very unclear to her as the conflict drags on in Syria. She does not want to stay in Lebanon, as remaining here means to continue to struggle with the challenge, please click, of not knowing what's going to happen to her or to her family or her fellow refugee community. In particular, Sana is concerned with the future of her children, who will soon graduate out of the non-formal school and enter Lebanon's public system, one that she believes to be of not as great quality. The lack of quality educational opportunities for her children has also made Sana think seriously about traveling abroad, even though it's quite risky. One more click, Mary. She says, I've achieved what I want to aspire. Now I have to think of my children. Next slide, please, Mary. And despite the purpose and fulfillment teachers have gained in their roles, we also see how Harun, Maher, and Sana all struggle with huge professional demands and limited support. They spoke of psychological exhaustion and high levels of stress. They talk about feeling powerless to transcend social, economic, and political barriers that constructed around them in Lebanon. And as refugees, these educators have to balance their personal challenges alongside their professional commitments. And these challenges can make the hard work of teaching even harder, especially as the conflict in Syria becomes more protracted and future stability seems to be far from reach. The next slide, Mary. So this work was conducted in the relationship to one crisis, the crisis in Syria, whereas is the crises that have been unfolding in Lebanon have continued to build. So you can just sort of click through, Mary. There have been ongoing protests against the government. There was COVID. There was the bomb blast in 2020 that ripped through Beirut. And recently there's been quite a financial collapse within Lebanon. So I want to underscore here that there isn't just one crisis or emergency that's happening to these teachers, but a layering and extending of instability that when I speak with teachers, I really hear in their own layering of stress and psychological strain. And that there's a very strong feeling of what will come next, which crisis will come next, to just add another layer of difficulty to their efforts of building a future and to be building a future for their students. Next slide, Mary. So just to underscore that the situation in Lebanon really makes it abundantly clear that the way in which we think about supporting refugee teachers, how long that support will be necessary, and what shape that support should take is really a topic that needs much greater focus and consideration and localization, because every experience is very particular to the multi-layers of crisis and conflict and disruption that teachers are facing. For the Syrian refugee teachers, I feel like I'm not sure there's been a better time when a call to action such as this one has really been so fundamentally necessary. And I just want to emphasize a few ways in which this research speaks directly to those calls to action. And I think one of them is a real need to listen to the individual voices of teachers as a pathway for collective responses. And that while we think about support from a global level, that there's really very different experiences that are highlighted in the voices we heard today and should be reflected in the type of support that is provided. Also that teachers, and I know Mary, you underscored this and what you were saying, are aspiring and established professionals, and the way in which we provide support, work with them, pay them, and consider their efforts really needs to be reflected in how the continuing training that they're provided and the support that they're given in their work. Also, something that I have been thinking a lot about is this idea that teacher well-being should really be a means to teacher well-being and not a means to student well-being or student learning in a classroom, because in my perspective that these teachers are individuals that they themselves are to be supported, and seeing them improve themselves and seeing them feeling more accomplished in their work is really an end to itself, and not only having to peg the type of support we provide to teachers to what we think is going to trickle down to students themselves. And then finally, that there's complex challenges that really need complex support. So often we tend to think one type of support might just blanket all of the ways that we are helping teachers, but just pointing out, having listened to Maher, to Haroon, and to Sana, that there's many different things that they are needing support, many of different things that they're balancing in their classroom, and really thinking that there needs to be more than just one way to provide support to teachers in these settings. So I think, Vidor, I might have been over by 30 seconds, and that is the end of what I have to say right now. Thanks, Mary, for working through with me on the clicks.
No, thank you for being flexible, and sorry if we threw off your ultimate plan there, but
that's
okay. That was wonderful. It's always great to hear more about the work that you've been doing, and in this forum in particular. So in terms of where we are at this point, three things. One, I would invite you to join us on video if you're comfortable doing that. Of course, there's no obligation, but it's nice to see one another's faces. We have a few moments to engage in discussion with Lizzie and to ask her questions about the work that she just presented. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and put a link in our chat box to the shared Google Doc that we have around the call to action, because we would like to welcome all of you to feed your thoughts into that work as well. At the top of the session today, you heard Charlotte Bergen talk about the collective efforts for putting together a transformational agenda around strengthening support to teachers in crisis contexts. And we want to make sure throughout the event series, we're giving plenty of opportunities to members and participants as yourselves to feed into this process. So you can see the link here, just so everyone has that available, and we'll maybe circle back to it in the final moments of our time together. But for now, let me also introduce Vidor, because he and I are co-facilitating this session, and you heard from both of us in the plenary a few moments ago, but would really just welcome your questions for Lizzie. Feel free to raise your Zoom hand or post them in the chat box, and we can dive into the conversation a bit more. Great. Brian, I see your,
okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I just wasn't sure.
I see Brian's Zoom hand. Please join
Hi,
us.
thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. Hi, Lizzie. Nice to see you again. Just a quick question, really. Picking up also on some of the themes from the earlier presentations. Were you picking up much in your research to do with power dynamics and teacher professional development? Because one of the things that I was really picking up and have been kind of continually, my work is both in research and in teacher training, is teachers going through training and then feeling super frustrated because they're not allowed to deploy the training in practice because of decisions made by at local level, for example, by school principals or school supervisors, who themselves don't very often don't actually have any pedagogical background or any teaching background themselves, particularly in non-formal schools, in more improvised context. So I was just wondering if the dynamics of that kind of appeared at all. And part of what I was asking behind that question is, one of the things that I've tried to do is to get peer-to-peer work going on in terms of teacher observations. And what that has uncovered is some of the massive complexities in terms of people's defensiveness and perceived power structures within the schools that might lead to that being either kind of weaponized or being used as to deliberately engineer, or the perception that it's been used to deliberately engineer or exacerbate power structures within the schools themselves.
I'll try to answer under a minute because I saw Danny's note. So thank you. That's a good question. I think power is very important at play in lots of different ways. I think one of the power structures that we see more limiting in just the schools that I've worked with is sort of the NGO power. So above the school system, that's what more than anything, what teachers are going to be. They're going to be, it was considered that if you taught older students that somehow you were more important, as that just seems to be built into everyone's understanding. And so not always having power over how you got to choose your classroom, or whether or not you were teaching certain subjects, like that was also an issue. But in the places that I worked, there was a lot more acceptance of bringing whatever they had been trained into the classroom, and a lot of the trainings were facilitated through those organizations. So that was particularly supported. I will say that one of the things I think caught people by surprise with the power struggles between the teachers around either who could one up somebody else, and even like in what they were planning and what they were implementing in the classroom, or there was, in a lot of background relationships that had to do with religion, that had to do with where people were from, that played out in ways that I think that everyone wasn't always ready when they thought they were just focusing on the students, which just says like that whole system is much more complex than we think about just teachers being in a setting teaching to students.
Thanks very much, and for doing it so succinctly as well. Sorry about the time pressure.
We had a very short time.
Yeah, no worries. We just wanted to take the opportunity to surface some of this and keep our thought process going. So feel free to put any additional questions in the chat box.
Suddenly run out of time in our room. There are a lot more questions that we could have put to Adane. It was such an inspiring presentation. Yeah, so next time we'll make sure there is more time, but we will share the full case studies and the presentations with you after the event today. And also just to say that we will keep those